You want something? Take it. Although the guns are all fake, because those wankers wouldn't trust me with the real ones.
What?
Hey, do you fancy either of the birds?
This is the Mandarin?
I know, it's embarrassing.
We've seen the pros and cons of Iron Man 3, and in my view, the pros far outweigh the cons. The film did have some issues, but all that means to me is that Shane Black didn't make Iron Man 3 perfect. And considering just how much effort he put forth in making it as good as possible, that is totally forgivable to me. I've been around the block with films for years, and I know the difference between a good screenwriter who just can't make a screenplay perfect and someone who clearly isn't even trying. Still, the problems pointed out in the review are, I think, fair and legitimate problems that need to be considered, whether they ruin the film for you or not. However, after this film was released, many viewers out there, including a real-life friend of mine, started talking about another supposed problem. The problem with the Mandarin. Now, like most people in the world, I had no idea who the Mandarin was when entering Iron Man 3. I thought they made him up for the movie. But apparently, he was Tony's main villain in the comics, sort of the Joker to his Batman. Obviously, they went a completely different way in the film, and this had many fans of the comics disappointed and at times outraged by them not using the comic book Mandarin and instead making him an idea rather than an actual character in itself. This kind of a problem is very different from the problems mentioned in the review because it's basically only saying that this film did something wrong by simply not making this character the character from the comic book. I've actually struggled to decide if this even counts as a problem at all, or if it's just a fan objection with no substantive marks against the film. And so we have the big question. Does the Mandarin matter? Or to be more specific, does it matter that they made the Mandarin a plot twist and didn't use the actual guy from the comic books? Before I even continue here, let me issue a warning to all the Marvel fans out there. I say specifically Marvel fans because these are the only people who I think had a problem with this. Most people, as I said, didn't even know who the Mandarin was. Try as I might, I was not able to leave all of my personal feelings out of this video. Obviously, I respect anyone's right to dislike anything for whatever reason they wish, but if I'm being honest, the fact that they finally made a legitimate film out of one of these Marvel things, and yet so many people would shit upon it for the same fanboy reasons that made the other Marvel movies suck, that gets on my nerves. There's just no way I'm going to be able to leave the nerve getting out of this video entirely, and I realize that I'm probably going to offend a few people at times in this video. But nevertheless, I have tried my best to be fair with the issue itself. So, who was the Mandarin in the comic books? Well, first, let me thank the screenwriters of Iron Man 3 personally for making it so that I'm researching this for the sake of this video, and not because they just plunked one of these stupid comic book characters in the film with no explanation of who they are, because hey, everyone reads the comic books, right? No. No, we don't. Fuck you. Anywho, in the comics, the Mandarin was a supervillain. He apparently had a big ego just like Tony, but also had a strong sense of honor. He tried to take over the world countless times, had a big cult following, and he had 10 magic rings that were adapted from alien technology. He was also apparently a scientist and a martial arts master, so basically, he was a supervillain. I'm sure there are a lot of other character traits that could be added to that list, but as I've never read the comics, and still do not care to, I couldn't tell you what they are. But one thing is clear. This was not the character they used in the film. In Iron Man 3, the Mandarin was just an idea created by Killian. No magic rings, no martial arts, the Mandarin was just plain not featured at all. Now, as I said in the review, I thought that was a great twist. Everything that you fear about the Mandarin was designed to make you fear, designed to make you hate and revile him, and in doing so, you're playing right into Killian's hands. To me, that is a much more interesting idea than anything that was described about the Mandarin in the comic books. But I've heard one common objection every single time something like that is said. If you liked the Mandarin twist yourself, you've probably heard it too. How would you like it if they did this to any number of other beloved villains in other works? What if they did this with the Joker or Voldemort? If they took those villains that you know and love so much and reduced them to someone else's creative idea? Well, first, let's put the Voldemort part of that question to rest once and for all. That is not even remotely the same thing. A film adaptation of a book is very different from a film adaptation of a comic book series. The Harry Potter films are based on 7 specific Harry Potter books. So Harry Potter Movie 1 should follow Harry Potter Book 1 as close as possible, etc. If they did a Mandarin thing with Voldemort in, say, The Goblet of Fire, I would take issue with that because it was unfaithful to the book it was based on, not simply because it was unfaithful to Voldemort from the books. Comic book adaptations are very different from book adaptations. Most comic book series have literally been around for decades with decades of stories and backstories, far more than any book series. For the most part, it would be impossible for a screenwriter to make 1 or even 6 movies out of a series like this, and for most of them, that's not even their intention anyway. The films are a different entity altogether, and I think that's the way a comic book film should be. The only comic books that I think should be followed as closely as possible in a film are the standalone graphic novels, like, for example, Watchmen. Here, we're talking about one movie based on one graphic novel, and if they did a Mandarin type of thing with Watchmen, I would have had a problem with that, but for the same reason I would have had a problem with the Voldemort example. With regard to a comic book series, these aren't what the movies are exactly based on, nor should they be. In this case, the comic book series are just a source material, but the movies aren't a literal film translation of them the way that Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter are a literal film translation of those books. For example, The Dark Knight was heavily inspired by The Killing Joke, but it's not a Killing Joke movie. It's its own film that has that comic as its inspiration. So, back to the original question I was asked. What if they did this with the Joker? What if it turned out that Maroney had hired an actor to play the Joker, and it turns out that he was the main antagonist all along, and the Joker was just a drunken loser? Would I have been okay with that? And my answer is the same. If it worked in the story, I might. Or I might not, it depends on what they did with it. But it's funny that the Joker of all villains would be used in this example, because as I think of what The Dark Knight was about, I think that twist would have worked remarkably well in that film. Batman in the Dark Knight series was all about using a symbol to bring down organized crime. Now, think about if Maroney had tailor-made the Joker to be what he was. This would have been organized crime beating Batman at his own game, turning the tables on him using the same tricks he was using. The Joker would have been even more of a literal symbol for chaos than he was in the actual film. I think that would have been a great twist for that movie. But that's the real issue here, isn't it? Because when you're asked, what if they did this with the Joker, you aren't being asked, do you think this would have worked or not? You're being asked, wouldn't you be bothered that this wasn't the guy from the comics? I'm not just some fanboy looking to jizz myself because the Joker's in a movie. If I was, I would have liked the original Batman film. Which I didn't. I want a good story, and if all the character traits of the Joker were used as a literal figurehead symbol for chaos in The Dark Knight, that would have fit right in and made for a great story. Now, what they actually did in The Dark Knight was obviously good as well, but that goes back to the Mandarin issue too. Maybe a good story could have been built around the Mandarin in the comics, but this was good too. You can't just deny good because you were denied having your fan service served up to you, and if you do, then I think that's where the term fanboy came from in the first place. I mean, maybe Iron Man 3 didn't have any Iron Man versus Mandarin villain fights, but it had a good story. Hell, they used that one guy who had laser feet or whatever lame thing it was in Iron Man 2, and he did absolutely fuck all in the story. But hey, that was the guy from the comics, so yay? And then on the other hand, you had the Mandarin, which was just an idea and not the guy from the comics, but it facilitated telling a good story. Now, are you honestly telling me that you prefer that dumb guy in Iron Man 2 to what they did with the Mandarin in Iron Man 3 just because the dumbass from the comics was featured in that one? And if your answer is yes, I'm sorry, that's just fanboy nonsense. Also, going back to The Dark Knight, that movie wasn't exactly Batman's story. I mean, let's face it, none of us came out of that movie talking about how great Batman was in it. We were all talking about the Joker. Iron Man 3 was Tony's story. It was his last hurrah. And putting a big epic villain in this would have diminished that, I think. So I don't think using the comic book Mandarin would have worked for a final film anyway. I think if they wanted to use the comic book Mandarin, they should have done it in the second film. Those are usually where everything goes to hell for characters in the story anyway. Have the Mandarin be the big dominant threat that tears Tony's world apart in Iron Man 2, and then have Iron Man 3 focus on Tony resolving that. Hell, they could even have substituted his anxiety being about the Avengers ending for being about what the Mandarin did to him. But instead, they chose to waste our time by showing us Avengers toy commercials and bullshit. Thank you again, shitty Iron Man 2. The point is that a change to something you're familiar with is only good or bad depending on how and why it's being done. You may remember a few years back when I made that video expressing my outrage that the Ninja Turtles were going to be aliens in the new film. That idea really bothered the crap out of me. But not just because they were changing the Turtles' origins, it bothered me because this didn't seem to be being done for any particular purpose. It seemed like Michael Bay was saying, boy howdy, those kids sure love aliens, so that's what I'll make them Ninja Turtles. Hey, it worked in Transformers, so why not? But I'll say this. If it turns out that the Ninja Turtles being aliens are for the sake of storytelling and making them aliens makes the story better in a way that couldn't have been done without making them aliens, I'm all for it. I sincerely doubt that's why they're doing it, but if the story is improved by making aliens, then all the better for it. Another thing I like about the Mandarin twist is that it's a surprise this other person was the villain the whole time twist that actually works. That has been done so rarely, especially in recent times. Look at the Mandarin twist compared to the shitty Bane twist in the end. The Mandarin had only ever been seen from a distance in the film, so the audience kinda knew that there was something up with this. And then it turns out that someone who was already a central villain was even more central a villain than we knew. And it turns out that someone who we thought was the villain who makes speeches and then beats the good guy up in the end was really an idea. Someone manufactured by the real villain himself. With regard to Bane, we were never given any reason to think that he was anything but the main villain, and that dumbass woman was never portrayed as the villain until the last possible second in the film. That's not a twist, that's just something we didn't have a fair shake at figuring out. And then it turns out that she's not Miranda Tate, she's Talia. Okay, am I supposed to jizz myself because I'm 1 out of 100,000 people who knows who that is? Fuck you. And then Bane, who we thought was the main villain who makes speeches and then beats out the hero in the end, turns out to be the villain that makes speeches and beats up the hero in the end. The only twist here is that he was even less relevant than we thought he was. But what's perhaps most refreshing about the Mandarin twist is that it breaks away from a tired trend that has cropped up in Hollywood recently, and that trend all stems from the Joker's interrogation scene in The Dark Knight. Here was the Joker, having been caught by the authorities, and even though he was locked down, even though he was handcuffed and surrounded by officers, the police commissioner, and even Batman himself, you still felt like he was in charge. This scene was revolutionary, and the only problem with revolutionary ideas is that after they're executed and successful, everyone else tries to get in on the idea. I'm just gonna say it. After 2008, everyone in Hollywood has been trying to out-Joker the Joker. That isn't going to happen. You have to do something new. The Joker's interrogation scene was groundbreaking, but ever since then we've had film after film with the villain dramatically march down corridors and put in a holding cell, but surprise, because that's just where they want to be. Guys, it's not gonna work again. Don't be afraid to try to do something original, because what was once new and interesting has now turned into the cinematic equivalent of a fad. The Mandarin twist works because it knows you're expecting something like this again and does the exact opposite. It knows you expect an epic villain that controls the situation and instead gives you a villain that was nothing more than a figment of this person's imagination. With all the Joker plagiarism in Hollywood today, that's a much better villain than just doing that again. Now, is Aldrich Killian really a great villain? No, not really, but it's his idea and his plan that infuses the film with substance, even though his external actions were downright routine. Before I conclude this video, I want to read you a statement from Shane Black himself regarding the Mandarin twist. Shane was asked specifically to defend his decision to do what he did with the Mandarin, and here is that defense in his own words. I would say that we struggled to find a way to present a mythic terrorist that has something about him that resonated after the movie's over as having been a unique take or a clever idea or a way to say something of use. And what was of use about the Mandarin's portrayal in the movie, to me, is that it offers up a way that you can sort of show how people are complicit in being frightened. They buy into things in the way that the audience for this movie buys into it. And hopefully, by the end, you're like, yeah, we were really frightened of the Mandarin, but in the end, he really wasn't that bad after all. In fact, the whole thing was just a product of this anonymous behind-the-scenes guy. I think that's a message that's more interesting for the modern world because I think there's a lot of behind the scenes, a lot of fear that is generated towards very available and obvious targets which could perhaps be directed more intelligently at what's behind them. Shane, with all the idiot superhero films these days being barfed off of an assembly line and targeted only at the easily entertained, Hollywood needs more people like you. So now we can finally answer the original question. Does the Mandarin matter? No. What they did with him was true to the theme of the film, and it worked well in the story. That is all that matters. To the fanboys who didn't like this portrayal of the Mandarin as an idea rather than the actual character, I'm not saying you should. Anyone is well within their right to dislike anything for any reason. Hell, I've heard from many a Star Trek fan who didn't like the new Khan, not because he completely sucked as a villain and as a character, but because he was fucking white. I guess what I'm saying is, stop being butthurt. If you wanted your Mandarin character portrayed on film and were disappointed, I'm truly sorry, but it worked well for the story. Or let me put it this way. I had to sit through film after film filled with nothing but stupid, empty, pointless, brainless, meaningless, substanceless, fanboy masturbation material bullshit. You guys can sit through a story for a change.